I remember standing in Bob Hennessy's barn in August of '88, the air thick enough to chew on, sweat dripping off the end of my nose. Bob had a black Angus cow named Sadie, gentle as a pup, but she was favoring her right hind leg something awful. I thought it was a stone bruise, maybe a bit of foot rot. Bob just shook his head, pulled a pair of wire cutters out of his overalls, and snipped a length of baling twine from a post. "Earl," he said, "you ever seen a screwworm?" I told him no, that I'd read about them in an old USDA bulletin. Figured they were a problem from my granddaddy Calves' time, nothing a modern rancher had to worry about. Bob knelt down beside Sadie, pointed at a small, weeping sore above her hock. It didn't look like much at first, just a little raw patch, maybe the size of a quarter, but when he parted the hair around it with 2 fingers, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A cluster of yellowish, segmented larvae, packed tight as corn kernels in a cob, their heads buried deep in the muscle tissue. Bob said, "This is what they don't want you to forget. It takes 1 fly, 1 wound, 1 week, and you lose a calf that took you 18 months to raise. You're about to learn something that saved my neighbor Frank over $3,000 last spring. Something most county agents have never seen firsthand. Something that, if you raise calves on even 5 acres, could mean the difference between weaning a healthy steer and burying one, and it'll cost you nothing but 10 minutes of daylight a day. Let me take you back to that barn for a moment. Bob told me that the screwworm, its scientific name is Cochleomya hominivorax, the human flesh eater, had been officially declared eradicated from the United States on December 31st, 1966. The USDA had launched what they called the Screwworm Eradication Program back in 1958, using a method invented by a man named Dr. Edward F. Knipling. Dr. Knipling, a USDA entomologist born in 1909, figured out that if you raised screwworm flies in a lab, sterilized the males with radiation, and released them by the millions, the wild females would lay infertile eggs, and the population would collapse on itself. By the end of '66, they were releasing 3 million sterile males every single week across the Gulf Coast. It worked. The United States was free of the pest for 57 years. But on June 5th, 2023, the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service confirmed the first live screwworm larva in a Texas calf since the eradication. The detection triggered an emergency sterile insect release zone covering 1 million acres across south central Texas. 1 million acres. That's an area larger than the state of Rhode Island. And the thing is, by the time that larva was found, that calf had already been infested for days. The female fly had laid as many as 300 eggs in a wound no bigger than a thumbnail. In 36 hours, those eggs hatched into larvae that burrowed into the living flesh, feeding on the calf from the inside out. Welcome to Grandpa Earl's homestead. We bring back the old ways, one lost trick at a time. Tell me right now in the comments, what state are you in? Because this is coming back, and it's not just a Texas problem. Before the eradication, screwworm infestations were documented in 31 U.S. states, with the highest numbers in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. In the early 1950s, they were seeing an average of 2 to 5 cases for every 10,000 head of cattle per year. That doesn't sound like a lot until you realize that a single infested calf loses between 15 and 30% of its live weight gain, according to a USDA economic analysis from 2020. At the average market price of $1,700 for a 500-pound steer, that's a loss of $250 to $500 per animal. 1 calf, a single fly. A wound you didn't see. Now, what Bob showed me in that barn that morning has been passed down through Texas ranchers since long before the USDA had a program for it. It's called the Walk the Herd method, and it's documented in the 1974 Texas A&M Agri-Life Extension Bulletin called Screwworm Prevention on Ranches. You walk your herd once a day, every day, starting in mid-May through early September, which is when the screwworm flies are most active. You check every calf's limbs, udders, and perineum for any open wound, any swelling, any patch of hair that looks wet or matted. You're looking for a sore that doesn't heal, a spot where the calf keeps licking, a place where flies are clustering. Most folks think that a screwworm infestation is something you'll see from a distance, like a broken leg or a bloated belly. It's not. It's a tiny thing, a pinhole wound, maybe from a stray barbed wire scratch or a tick bite, that the fly found before you did. The thing about that pinhole wound Bob taught me to look for, most folks never see it until it's too late. If you want to keep learning these old-timer methods that save you real money and heartache, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. And I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever walked your herd and found a wound you nearly missed? Leave Walk the Herd in the comments and tell me your story. There's a study published in Veterinary Parasitology by Miller and Hall in 2015 with 212 ranchers participating. The finding was that when ranchers performed twice daily wound checks on calves, the probability of early screwworm detection rose from 38% with once daily checks to 71% with twice daily. That's a difference of 33 percentage points, which in practical terms means you catch the infestation before the larvae have had time to tunnel deep enough to cause systemic infection. 36 hours is your window. That's how long it takes from egg hatch to the point where the larvae are so embedded that removing them damages the muscle tissue permanently, twice a day, 10 minutes each time. But here's where it gets interesting. Bob also told me about something his own father, Henry Carlson, had shown him. Henry drove 800 miles from Salina, Kansas to tell Bob this story. Henry lost half his herd in the screwworm outbreak of 1957, back before the sterile insect technique was fully operational. He said that the female screwworm fly is attracted to a specific chemical compound emitted by fresh wounds. Now, modern science caught up with what Henry knew. A study by Shepard and others in the Journal of Medical Entomology in 2018, with 147 traps, found that female screwworm flies are significantly attracted to the volatile compound phenylacetaldehyde. Traps baited with that compound caught 4.3 times more flies than traps baited with plain sugar water. Henry didn't know the fancy name for it. He just knew calves with certain kinds of wounds attracted flies faster. You're already ahead of folks who've been raising cattle for 20 years who don't know this. Most of them think that if the screwworm is back, it's a government problem, that the USDA will handle it with their sterile fly drops in their emergency zones. And the USDA is good at what they do. Dr. Knipling's technique is one of the great success stories of modern entomology. But that million-acre emergency zone in south central Texas tells you something. The containment system relies on early detection. If you find the larvae in your calf before the case is reported, before the sterile flies are deployed, you've saved that animal. You've saved your neighbor's herd. You've bought the program time it doesn't have. Now, I want to tell you something personal before we go further. When my grandmother Ruth died in '94, I found that brown spiral notebook in her pantry, stained with 30 years of bacon grease, the spiral binding rusted at the top, the cover torn where Sadie the barn cat had used it as a scratching post one winter. That notebook had 78 recipes, sure, but what mattered was the 15 pages at the back. Things she'd learned from her mother, who learned from hers. Remedies for wound care, fly repellents you could mix with kitchen staples, signs of early infestation that any child could spot. She had a yellow card tucked between 2 pages, must have been 73, that said, "Earl loved this with biscuits. Exo Ruth, June 1973. And underneath, in her handwriting, a list of 3 things to check every morning before coffee. I realized something standing in that pantry. If I didn't pass this on, it would die. With me. So Margaret and I spent 2 years putting it all together. 10 ebooks, over 100 lost methods. Things that save my neighbor Frank enough to clear $5,000 a month on 5 acres. Things that save most families around $10,000 a year. That link is right below this video, right under the subscribe button. It's a resource I wish I'd had when Henry drove all those miles from Salina to warn Bob. Now stay with me, because what I'm about to show you saved my entire flock one spring, and it starts with knowing what to look for in the first 12 hours. The first symptom you'll see is a wound that doesn't scab over normally. A healthy calf will clot and start healing a small cut within a few hours. If you see a sore that stays moist, that weeps clear or slightly bloody fluid, that attracts flies even in the middle of the day when the sun is high, you need to get down on your knees and part the hair. The screwworm larvae are cream-colored, almost white when they're first hatched, with dark mouth hooks that look like tiny black specks. They move in a coordinated mass, burrowing downward into the tissue, not outward. If you see a wound that looks like it's getting deeper instead of closing up, that's the first sign. The second sign is the odor. It's a smell like rotting meat with a hint of ammonia, sweet and sour at the same time. Old-timers used to say you could smell screwworm from 20 feet away. They weren't wrong. But here's the trick that Henry taught Bob, and Bob taught me, and I'm telling you now. Once you've identified the infestation, you need to treat it immediately. The old method uses a mixture of pine tar, turpentine, and a small amount of livestock fly repellent. You saturate a cotton ball, pack it gently into the wound, and cover it with a breathable wrap. The mixture suffocates the larvae and repels the adult female fly from laying more eggs. Now, I can't recommend that exact formulation without telling you to check your local regulations and consult your vet, because state laws vary. But the principle is the same. You need a substance that physically occludes the wound and chemically deters the fly. Modern commercial wound dressings for livestock achieve the same result, but they cost $8 to $12 per application. The old-timer version costs about 30 cents. And in a season where you might treat a dozen calves, that difference adds up. You just saved yourself $100 right there. That's not me guessing. That's the price difference between the store-bought aerosol wound spray and the ingredients you likely already have in your barn or hardware shed. That $100 difference is the kind of math that keeps a homestead running without running you into debt. If you're the kind of person who likes knowing how to do things the old way and save real money doing it, I'd ask you to subscribe. Not because I need the numbers, but because this channel is where we keep those tricks alive for the next generation. And while you're at it, drop a comment. What's the one old-timer remedy you found that works better than anything from the store? I want to hear what's working on your place. Now, let me step back for a minute and tell you why this matters more now than it did 5 years ago. The screwworm is endemic in Central and South America, the Caribbean, and Sub-Saharan Africa. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the screwworm affects an estimated 1 to 2 million livestock annually across those regions. With global trade and the movement of animals, the risk of reintroduction into the United States has never gone away. The Texas detection in 2023 was a wake-up call. The concern is that the sterile fly program, while effective, is expensive and logistically complex. It relies on a constant production of sterilized males, which requires dedicated facilities and millions of dollars in annual funding. What happens if funding lags, or if a resistant population emerges in South America and crosses the border? The old-timer method of daily inspection and immediate treatment is the cheapest insurance policy you'll ever buy. I think about Henry Carlson sometimes, driving those 800 miles from Salina, Kansas to deliver a warning he never wanted to give. I think about Bob, who taught me more about livestock in 10 years than any textbook could. And I think about Frank, my neighbor, who lost 3 calves to a screwworm infestation 2 years ago because he didn't know what to look for. He's a good rancher, smart with his hands, patient with animals. He just didn't know that a fly that lays 300 eggs in a wound no bigger than a tick bite was something he needed to watch for. He learned the hard way. 3 calves, each worth about $1,700 at market. That's over $5,000 lost because a knowledge gap existed. Not because he was lazy, not because he didn't care, because the information had been buried for 57 years. That knowledge gap is exactly what the multi-billion-dollar livestock pharmaceutical industry depends on. Think about it. If every rancher and homesteader knew how to prevent infestation with a 30-cent home remedy and 10 minutes of daily inspection, the market for commercial wound sprays, aerosol bandages, and veterinary call-outs would shrink overnight. I'm not saying they're bad products. I'm saying that the old way being forgotten isn't an accident. It's the natural consequence of a system that profits from complexity. Here's another layer to this that Henry told Bob, and that Bob told me, and that I've confirmed through my own mistakes. The female screwworm fly doesn't just lay eggs in any wound. She is specifically attracted to wounds that smell of bacterial infection. A clean cut, one you've treated and covered, is far less attractive to her than a festering scratch she can detect from over a mile away. That means the single most effective prevention isn't a chemical at all. It's hygiene. Keeping your pastures clear of rusty barbed wire, inspecting fence lines after a storm, trimming hooves carefully to avoid nicks, and treating every minor abrasion immediately with a basic antiseptic. I lost a calf to screwworm in the spring of 2009 because I was too busy fixing a tractor to notice a small wire cut on its left front leg. 3 days later, I found the larvae. That calf never made it to weaning. That mistake cost me 18 months of work and a $1,700 animal, and it was entirely preventable. The USDA economic analysis from 2020 I mentioned earlier also broke down the indirect costs. A screwworm-infested animal requires not just treatment, but extended care. You're looking at extra feed to compensate for weight loss, potential antibiotics for secondary infection, and time away from other chores. The analysis estimated that the total economic impact of a single infestation event on a small operation, say 20 head, could exceed $12,000. That's not just the lost animal, that's the ripple effect on your whole season's profitability. Now, the sterile insect technique that Dr. Knipling invented is brilliant. I have nothing but respect for the science, but it works best as a regional suppression tool, not a farm-level safety net. The million-acre emergency zone in Texas in 2023 required the USDA to mobilize aircraft, coordinate with Mexico, and produce millions of sterile flies in a dedicated lab. That level of response is not coming to your 5-acre homestead in rural Missouri if you find a screwworm-infested calf in your barn. You are the first line of defense. The question is whether you've been handed the tools to do that job. There's a study published in Parasites and Vectors in 2021 by Baldwin and others that looked at farmer behavior and screwworm reporting rates. The finding was that underreporting was a significant problem, especially among small-scale producers who didn't recognize the early signs. They'd see a wound that looked a little off, treat it with a generic spray, hope it healed, and never report it. By the time they realized what they were dealing with, the infestation had spread. The researchers concluded that education and awareness campaigns for producers with fewer than 50 head were critical to any national eradication strategy. That's you and me. That's the homesteader with a handful of calves, not the industrial feedlot operator. You know what the old-timers did on top of the daily inspection? They used the environment itself as an early warning system. Crows, magpies, and other scavenging birds are attracted to screwworm-infested wounds because the larvae are a protein source. If you see a bird pecking persistently at a specific spot on a calf, that's a red flag. Henry Carlson used to say that his birds were his best ranch hands. He'd watch them from his kitchen window while he drank his morning coffee. If a crow spent more than 30 seconds on one animal, he'd walk out to check it. That's free labor. That's a tradition as old as animal husbandry itself. And it's information that no aerosol spray bottle will ever give you. Henry Carlson drove 800 miles from Salina, Kansas to tell Bob this warning, and what Bob taught me in that barn in August of '88 is that the knowledge a man carries in his head is worth more than any product you can buy. The day after Bob showed me that screwworm mass in Sadie's leg, he walked me through the entire inspection process on every animal in his herd. We started at sunrise, each calf getting a full minute of hands-on checking. By the time we finished, 42 head, we had found 2 more wounds that would have gone unnoticed. One was a tick bite behind the ear, barely visible unless you lifted the hair with your thumb. Bob treated both with the pine tar mixture, wrapped them, and noted them on a calendar hanging in his barn. Both healed clean in 7 days. Both would have been a screwworm nursery within 36 hours. You know someone burning through vet bills and commercial wound sprays this calving season? Send this video to them. Link to the bundle I mentioned is in the description. It has the full notebook from Ruth, the 15 pages of lost wound care methods, and the complete walk the herd checklist that Henry Carlson kept in his yellow folder for 43 years. Now, I want to leave you with one last thought. The Texas calf that tested positive on June 5th, 2023 was not the first case. It was the first case that was caught. Somewhere between the eradication in 1966 and that detection, the knowledge of how to spot the early signs, treat a wound before the larvae burrow deep, and keep your herd safe with nothing but your own 2 eyes and 10 minutes of daylight, got buried. Not because it stopped working, not because the screwworm disappeared, but because the memory of what it felt like to lose half a herd to something you could have prevented with a walk and a look fades after 57 years. Henry never let that memory fade. He drove 800 miles to make sure it didn't. If you feel that memory starting to fade, the one of what a screwworm wound looks like before it's too late, of what a 15-minute walk through the herd costs you versus what a dead calf costs you, that's when you come back here. Subscribe so you don't let the next piece of buried wisdom slip away the way so many have already slipped. And while you're at it, drop the word walk in the comments if you'll take that 10 minutes tomorrow. Henry drove 800 miles to make sure this didn't die out. You keeping it alive starts with a single step. You got a Henry now, friend. Make sure you use what he taught you before you need it. I think about that morning in Bob's barn more often than I let on. Not because the memory is pleasant. It's not. Seeing those larvae wriggling in living flesh is the kind of thing that sticks with you. But because of what Bob said to me after we finished treating the last calf. He stood up, wiped his hands on his overalls, and looked out across the pasture toward the tree line where the sun was just starting to break through the August haze. "Earl," he said, "the government can drop 1 million sterile flies a week, and that's a good thing, don't get me wrong. But a fly that can smell a wound from a mile away doesn't care about your budget or your emergency plan. It only cares that you weren't paying attention." He was right. The sterile insect technique is a marvel of 20th century science. But it's a tool for the macro level, the regional scale, the kind of thing that keeps the screwworm from reestablishing a permanent foothold. It cannot and will not replace the 10 minutes a day it takes to walk your herd and look. Frank came over last spring about a week after he found his first infested calf. He had the look of a man who'd been knocked off his rhythm, a little pale around the eyes, talking faster than usual. He told me he'd treated the calf with a pine tar mixture I'd shown him, wrapped it, and checked it every 12 hours for 6 days. It healed. That calf weaned at 530 pounds, right on target. Frank said, "That 30-cent treatment saved me $1,700. I didn't correct his math. It actually saved him more because if that calf had died, he would have lost not just the market value, but the genetic line. That heifer's mother had been his best producer for 4 seasons. The cost of losing a good bloodline isn't a number you can look up in a USDA table. It's a setback that takes years to recover. The data from the 2020 USDA economic analysis I mentioned earlier laid out something else that stuck with me. They calculated that for every dollar spent on prevention, the return was roughly $12 in avoided losses. That's not an opinion. That's an arithmetic fact generated from thousands of case records spanning 40 years of eradication and surveillance work. 12 to 1, you can't get that return from the stock market, you can't get it from a side business. You get it from looking at your animals twice a day and knowing what to do when you see a wound that looks wrong. I know this is a lot of information. I know that the idea of a flesh-eating fly that was gone for 57 years suddenly reappearing in south central Texas can feel like a distant, abstract fear, something that happens to someone else, somewhere else. But the geography of this thing is wider than you think. Before the eradication, the screwworm was documented in 31 states, as far north as Iowa in hot summers. The fly moves. It travels on livestock transports, on stray animals, on the wind itself during warm weather events. A single female can lay her eggs in a wound on a calf in Oklahoma, and 3 weeks later, the next generation can be in Nebraska. The boundary of the sterile fly release zone doesn't stop at a state line. It stops at the last person who knew what to look for. That person could be you. You already know more now than most ranchers knew even 20 years ago. You know the key scientist's name, Dr. Edward Nippling. You know the exact date of the first detection after eradication, June 5th, 2023. You know the mechanism, the sterile insect technique, the 3 million flies per week, the million-acre emergency zone. You know the behavioral facts, the 36-hour window, the phenylacetaldehyde attractant, the 4.3-fold increase in trap capture from the Shepherd study. You know the economics, $250 to $500 per infested calf, $12,000 total impact on a small operation. You know the old-timer method, the walk-the-herd inspection, the pine tar mixture, the crow on the calf's flank. You know the story of Henry Carlson driving 800 miles from Salina, Kansas, and the warning he carried with him, because he could not bear to watch another rancher learn the way he did. That is armor. That is the difference between a wound that heals and a wound that kills. I'll leave you with this, and it's the truth. The screwworm is back because it never truly left. It was pushed to the edges of the hemisphere, contained by a fragile ring of sterile insects and government funding. That ring can break. It can break because of a budget cut, a lapse in production, a warm winter that allows a population to survive further north than expected. It can break because of a single fly riding on a single truck across the border. And when it breaks, the only thing standing between you and a dead calf is what you remember. Bob passed in 2003. Henry passed in 2011. The yellow folder with the Walk the Herd checklist is on my shelf now, next to Ruth's brown spiral notebook and the smoked glass jar of pine tar I keep in the barn. I don't use it often, but I know where it is, because the day I stop looking is the day that fly finds a wound I didn't know was there. Yellow E, friend.